Delia is 63 with $200,000 saved, and every retirement calculator she's ever used has told her the same thing, which is no, not enough. Keep working. She's been treating that $200,000 as a verdict on her whole life, proof that she got something wrong somewhere along the way. On its own, $200,000 generates about $667 a month, using a standard safe withdrawal rate, and $667 a month is not a retirement. The calculators are right about that piece and wrong about everything around it. Delia's Social Security will pay her about $2,779 a month, which is the average for a retired worker in 2026. Stack those together, and she has roughly $2,738 a month, or about $32,850 a year. And if Delia were married, with a spouse drawing their own average benefit, the household would be at about $4,899 a month, which is $57,700 a year. Now compare that to what older Americans actually spend. According to government data, households headed by someone 65 to 74 spend about $52,141 a year. And once you're 75 and up, it drops to about $41,471. Because people slow down, travel less, and the mortgage is often gone. So a married couple with $200,000 and two average Social Security checks is bringing in more than the typical household their age. Spins with thousands of dollars of margin. The $200,000 wasn't the thing that decided it. It was never going to be. Your savings is the smallest lever you have. I'm Mike, a regular guy who reached financial freedom on an ordinary income. This channel is where I explain the money stuff nobody ever sat us down and explained, the way I'd explain it to a friend across the kitchen table. If that's your thing, hit subscribe. There are 4 variables that decide whether $200,000 works, and every single one of them has more power over your retirement than the $200,000 does. They're worth taking in order of size, because the sizes are what show you why obsessing over your account balance is the least productive thing you can do. The first variable, and the largest by a wide margin, is when you claim Social Security. Here's the math that makes this so lopsided. Your benefit changes dramatically depending on when you start it. Claim at 62, the earliest possible age, and you receive about 70% of your full benefit permanently. Wait until your full retirement age of 67 and you get 100%. Wait all the way to 70 and you receive about 121%. For someone whose full benefit is that average $2,071, claiming at 62 means about $1,450 a month for life, while waiting until 70 means about $2,568 a month for life. That's a difference of $1,118 every month, or about $13,420 a year, and it's inflation adjusted and guaranteed for as long as you live. Now here's the comparison that should reframe your entire retirement. To generate that same $13,420 a year from a portfolio at a safe withdrawal rate, you would need roughly $335,000 in additional savings. So the decision of when to claim Social Security is worth more than $335,000 to Delia. Her entire life savings is $200,000. The claiming decision is worth well over 1.5 times everything she managed to save in 40 years of working. And it's a decision she makes with a form in an afternoon at no cost. That's the whole reason this reframe matters. For most people with modest savings, Social Security isn't a supplement to their retirement. It is their retirement, and the portfolio is the supplement. So the strategy for someone in Delia's position often runs opposite to instinct. Instead of claiming Social Security at 62 to preserve the $200,000, she does the reverse. She spends down a chunk of the $200,000 in her 60s specifically to delay Social Security as long as she can, permanently buying herself a much larger guaranteed check. Spending savings to buy a bigger lifetime benefit feels wrong, and mathematically it's often the single best move available, especially for someone who's healthy and has longevity in the family. There are real exceptions, and I won't pretend otherwise. If you have a serious health condition that shortens your expected lifespan, claiming earlier can genuinely be the better call. Someone with no savings at all to bridge the gap may simply need the income now, and that's a legitimate constraint rather than a mistake. And in a married couple, the higher earner delaying matters most, because that larger benefit is what the survivor keeps when one spouse dies. The second variable is housing, and it's nearly as powerful as the first. The single biggest determinant of whether $200,000 is enough isn't in your brokerage account. It's whether you own your home outright. Take two people with identical $200,000 and identical Social Security. One owns her house free and clear, the other pays $1,500 a month in rent. That's an $18,000 a year difference in what their retirement costs. And to generate an extra $18,000 a year from investments you'd need roughly $450,000 more in savings. So a paid-off house is worth more than twice Delia's entire life savings in terms of what it does for her ability to retire. This is why the standard advice to prioritize retirement accounts over paying off a mortgage, which is generally correct during your working years, deserves a second look as you approach retirement. Crossing into retirement without a housing payment shrinks the number you need rather than requiring you to grow the number you have, and shrinking the target is almost always easier than growing the pile. If you're going to be renting in retirement, that's not a catastrophe. It just means your number's genuinely higher and you should plan for it honestly rather than hoping. And there are middle paths. Downsizing to a smaller, paid-off place can free up equity and lower every associated cost, since a smaller home means lower taxes, lower insurance, lower utilities, and less maintenance. Some people move in with family. Some use a portion of home equity deliberately. What doesn't work is arriving at 65 with a large mortgage and no plan for it. Your savings is the smallest lever you have. The third variable is your spending, and this one has a conversion rate that most people never learn. Every $500 a month you permanently cut from your expenses is worth about $150,000 in savings, because that's how much you'd need invested to generate $500 a month. That's a strategy, not deprivation. If Delia can find $500 a month of genuine, sustainable reduction in her cost of living, she has done something mathematically identical to saving another $150,000, except she can do it this year instead of over another decade of work. And here's what makes this more achievable in retirement than it sounds. Your expenses naturally fall when you stop working, and not because you're depriving yourself. The commuting cost disappears. The work clothes disappear. You stop paying into Social Security and Medicare on wages, which alone is 7.65% of your income. Restaurant lunches during the workday disappear. If the kids are grown and the mortgage is paid, entire categories vanish. That's exactly why government data shows spending declining as people age. From about $52,000 a year in the 65 to 74 range to about $41,000 after $75. Retirement is genuinely cheaper than working, and most calculators quietly assume it isn't. The place this variable becomes dangerous is healthcare, which is the one category that rises rather than falls. Before 65, if you retire early, you're buying your own insurance, and that's a real expense that has to be budgeted. After 65, Medicare covers a lot, but not everything, and the gaps, premiums, dental, vision, hearing, and especially long-term care are what turn a workable plan into a crisis. Long-term care in particular is the risk that can consume a $200,000 nest egg entirely. Since Medicare doesn't cover it, and a skilled nursing facility runs around $9,700 a month in 2026. If your savings is modest, the honest planning answer usually involves knowing that Medicaid exists as the backstop for long-term care, and understanding your state's rules well before you need them. The fourth variable is geography, and it's the one people most often refuse to consider, even though it's the fastest lever available. The same $200,000 and the same Social Security check buy dramatically different lives depending on where you live. Housing costs, property taxes, insurance, and everyday prices vary enormously between states and between metro areas and small towns within the same state. A retirement that's impossible in an expensive coastal city can be comfortable 2 states away on the identical income. Some states don't tax Social Security benefits or retirement income at all, while others do, which quietly changes your effective income without you doing anything differently. This lever isn't free in the ways that matter most. Moving away from your grandchildren, your friends, your doctors, and your church is a genuine loss. And I've seen people make that trade and regret it. But it's a real option that belongs on the table. And for someone whose alternative is working until 72, it deserves a serious look rather than an automatic no. There's also a middle version people overlook, which is staying in the same region but moving from the expensive part of it to a cheaper one 20 minutes away. Put all four together, and there are two versions of Delia. In the version where it doesn't work, she claims Social Security at 62 for $1,450 a month, rents an apartment for $1,500 a month, lives in a high-cost metro and spends about $45,000 a year. Her income is roughly $2,100 a month against $30,750 a month of spending. So she's pulling more than $1,600 a month from a $200,000 account that can only safely support $667. She runs out of money in roughly a decade. The calculators were right about this version. In the version where it works, she keeps working part-time until 67 or 70 and delays her benefit to $2,568 a month. She owns her modest home outright, and her total spending is about $34,000 a year. Her income is roughly $3,235 a month against $2,833 of spending, and she's actually adding to her savings rather than draining it. Same person, same $200,000, same career, same 40 years of work. Completely different retirement, and not $1 of the difference came from her savings balance. That's what the title of this video means. The four variables above are where retirement is actually decided. And every one of them is still adjustable at 60, at 63, at 63, at 65, in a way that your savings balance simply isn't. You cannot go back and save more in your 40s. You can absolutely change when you claim, where you live, what you owe on your house, and what your life costs. At 60, with a modest balance, there's more room than people think. Working even 2 or 3 extra years does 3 things at once, and they compound. It lets your savings keep growing instead of shrinking. It removes years that your money has to cover. And it lets you delay Social Security into a permanently larger check. That triple effect is why a couple extra years of work moves the needle more than almost any investment decision. Part-time work counts too. And often the goal isn't to fund your whole life, but simply to cover your expenses so you don't have to touch savings or claim. Early. A part-time job earning $1,500 a month in your 60s can be worth more to your plan than another $300,000 in savings would have been because of what it lets you avoid doing. Catch-up contributions are also worth knowing about. Once you're 50, the tax code lets you put extra money into retirement accounts beyond the normal limits. And between 60 and 63, that catch-up gets larger still. If you're in your peak earning years, with the house nearly paid off and the kids gone, those years can add meaningfully to a modest balance. What you actually do with that $200,000 once you retire matters too, because the instinct here costs people real money. When the balance is modest, the fear is enormous. And the reflex is to move everything into cash and safe accounts so it can't drop. That feels responsible. And over a retirement that might last 25 or 30 years, it quietly guarantees the money shrinks in what it can buy. At 3% inflation, prices roughly double over 24 years, so a portfolio parked entirely in cash loses about half its purchasing power across a normal retirement. The more sensible structure for a modest balance is to think in 2 layers. The first layer is 1 to 2 years of the money you'll actually withdraw, held in cash or something equally safe, so that when the market drops, you spend from that instead of selling investments at the bottom. That's your shock absorber, and it's what protects you from the most dangerous stretch, which is a bad market in your first few years. The second layer is the rest, kept invested in something diversified with real growth in it, because that portion needs to still be working in your 20. The exact mix depends on your situation, but the principle holds regardless. On $200,000, the difference between a portfolio that grows a little and one that just sits is the difference between the money lasting your whole life and running dry in your late 70s. Where that $200,000 lives matters as much as how it's invested because it changes what you actually get to spend. If it's all in a traditional 401k or IRA, every dollar you withdraw counts as ordinary income. So $667 a month might really be closer to $570 after tax. Money sitting in a Roth comes to you whole with nothing owed. And there's a second effect people miss, which is that traditional withdrawals raise your reported income. And that can push more of your Social Security into the taxable range, so a withdrawal can cost you twice. For someone with a modest balance, this is usually better news than it sounds. With total income in Delia's range, a large share of Social Security often isn't taxed at all, and a standard deduction for someone over 65 shields a meaningful chunk of what's left. Many retirees at this income level end up owing very little federal tax. The planning move, if you have years before you claim, is to use those low-income years to move some traditional money into a Roth while your bracket is nearly empty, which shrinks future taxable withdrawals and keeps more of your Social Security untaxed later. The other piece, specific to modest savings, is what happens to a couple when one person dies. And it's the scenario most likely to break a plan like Delia's. When a spouse dies, the household keeps only the larger of the two Social Security checks, not both. So, a couple bringing in $4,142 a month from two average benefits drops to roughly $2,568 if the higher earner was delaying, or as little as $2,715 and otherwise. That's a cut of nearly half the household's guaranteed income, while the expenses do not fall by anything close to half, since the housing, the insurance, and the property taxes stay exactly the same. This is why the delay decision matters so much more for the higher earner in a couple. Whichever benefit is larger is the one the survivor lives on, potentially for decades. So maximizing that specific check is really a form of insurance for whoever outlives the other. It's also why a couple with $200,000 should think carefully about the survivor scenario before assuming their combined income. Tells the whole story. Running the math for one person alone on the reduced income and the unchanged expenses is an uncomfortable exercise, and it's exactly the exercise that reveals whether the plan is actually solid. The shame around a modest retirement balance is, in most cases, larger than the actual financial gap. The retirement industry markets seven-figure targets because scary numbers sell products, and the result is millions of people who could retire comfortably believing they can't. Your savings is the smallest lever you have, which is genuinely good news, because it means the number you feel worst about is the one that matters least. Here's your one job after this video. Don't look at your savings balance. Instead, do this calculation. Write down what you expect to spend each month in retirement, honestly. Then go to the Social Security website and find your actual estimated benefit at 62, at your full retirement age, and at 70. Because those three numbers are sitting there waiting for you and most people have never looked. Subtract your chosen benefit from your monthly spending, and the gap that's left is the only part your savings has to cover. Multiply that gap by 300 and you have your real target. If your $200,000 covers it, you're done worrying. And if it doesn't, you now know exactly which of the four levers you need to pull and how far, which is a completely different position than staring at a balance and feeling like you failed. If this was useful, hit subscribe. This is what I do every week. Plain English, nothing to sell you. Next video, I'm going deep on the biggest of those four levers, which is exactly when to claim Social Security. 62, 67, or 70, the break-even math that most people get backwards, and the specific situations where claiming early is genuinely the right answer despite everything I just said. I'll walk you through how to decide for your own life. I'm Mike. I'll see you in the next one.